Our final speaker is going to be Martin Besner. So let me go ahead and introduce Martin. Martin is the president and CTO of Staties Incorporated. He enjoys putting his skills to use in the development of both Design Expert and Staties 360, as you can see here, as well as doing consulting projects and teaching webinars and other things on DOE. Besides actual DOE experience, Martin is skilled at Bayesian statistics and other statistical modeling, as well as statistical computing. He is the co-author of the book Formulation Simplified, along with yesterday's speaker Mark Anderson and Pat Whitcomb. So we are going to wrap up today and let Martin tell us what is recently new in Design Expert and Staties 360. Let's see. Oh, unmute yourself, Martin. Okay, we seem to be having some audio issues here. So give us a minute while we get the audio sorted out. Please give us another minute while we are sorting out the audio.
Testing.
I can hear you now.
Okay, I am sorry about that hiccup, but GoToWebinar just decided to drop the audio about 30 seconds before, so I found another way to get in. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the latest and greatest in our software. So thank you all for attending the final presentation of our 2023 DOE Summit. And my name is Martin Besner, and I'm the president and CTO here at Staties. So I deal a lot with the software on a daily basis. I've been here now for over 10 years and working on this pretty much every day. So I'm excited to share kind of what we've done in the past year or two, what we have coming up later this year, and then what we have planned for 2024. And as always, if you have any questions or suggestions for features, or hopefully no complaints, but if you do, you can feel free to contact me. I always give out my personal email, which is martin@staties.com, and I'll be happy to entertain any requests, complaints, usage questions, and so on. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started? So here's what we'll go through today. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction to our two software packages. This will just be a few minutes here. Then I'll talk about some of the recent features and show some of the recent features that we put in the past year or two. So the latest version of the software and the previous one. We have a new release coming up in just another month or two. So that'll be kind of the bulk of what I'll be talking about. So that'll be the upcoming features here. And then I'll also give a brief preview into what we have planned for 2024. And then finally conclude and kind of let you know of some new exciting license options that we have that have just been launched. Okay, so just some highlights of some of our most recent releases. So going back to about when I first started at Staties here, we had Design Expert 9, which introduced split plots and mixed models. Design Expert 10, which finally brought about a 64-bit version of our software, as well as multi-core CPU support. Design Expert 11 in 2017 was a huge release because it overhauled the entire graphical user interface. So if you remember our old crusty Windows 98 looking software, that went away in 2017 when we overhauled the entire UI. And just as an FYI, we also did release the Mac version at that time as well. So for those of you that are using our software through Parallels or some other emulation software or a virtual machine on a Mac, you could actually directly install the Mac version now, a native Mac version. Design Expert 12 brought about logistic regression, multiple graphs, and then some other advanced statistical modeling techniques. And then Design Expert 13, this is really where there was kind of a change point here in our software releases. So Design Expert 13 was released, which brought about, came with Poisson regression, multiple analyses, and column rounding, which some people are still not aware of these features, so I'll just briefly review them. But also at the same time as Design Expert 13 was released, we also released a new software package called Staties 360. So that came just a little bit later. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Staties 360, it's essentially what we like to consider a pro version of Design Expert. So we've gotten lots of requests for advanced features, things like Gaussian process models, scripting, and so on. And our philosophy has always been to keep Design Expert as simple as possible, because a large portion of our users are not statisticians and maybe don't even have a ton of real formal training in statistics. They're the engineers and chemists and researchers at universities. So Staties 360 contains a full copy of Design Expert, so you don't need to buy both. It's not something you buy in addition to Design Expert. Okay, but it also contains more stuff, more advanced stuff, more kind of maybe stuff that's not directly related to DOE. So don't worry, the Design Expert's not going anywhere. Design Expert will continue to be targeted towards engineers, formulators, and other people that are actually doing day-to-day stuff in R&D. All of our easier to use, bread and butter techniques, UI enhancements, ease of use, improvements will go into all of our software. So both Design Expert and Staties 360. Okay. However, if there's more advanced features or like really complicated models and whatnot, or stuff that's not really DOE, like scripting or gauge R&R or something like that, that's not traditional DOE, technical and computational features, those we plan to kind of keep in Staties 360 only. So that we're able to keep Design Expert, our core product, as focused and as easy to use as possible. So with that, why don't we jump right into kind of some of the stuff that we've worked on in the past year or two, just so that everybody is up to speed. And I'll briefly explain some of these. I'm not going to show off every single one of these because if we went through each one, it would take a very long time. However, almost all of these features that I'm going to talk about have a dedicated webinar or publication or tutorial or resource that's available on our website. So if you see a feature you like and maybe I don't talk about it too much, there is a lot more information that you could get on it from our website. And of course, feel free to contact me if you need more information. So I'm going to go back to the first release of Statis 360, and as well as Design Expert 13. Those were really released at about the same time. And going forward, both software packages will be released at the same time. So here were the main features that were added into kind of our big release here. We had Poisson regression for count data. We added a modified design space wizard. So if, for example, you want to do sequential experimentation where you're shrinking or expanding your design space in an attempt to gain more information, we now automate that process. One big feature that we didn't, that we've been asked for a long time is factor column rounding. And I'll talk about this. I'll show a little demo of this in just a minute here. Another one that really made our software easy to use for existing data. We know while we are a DOE package, we do realize that a lot of our users want to use Design Expert and Statis 360 to plug in old data and then use the software to analyze it. That used to be really hard to do. It's now a lot easier to do. And the one that I think is the most exciting is the multiple analyses. Okay. Those were added to both Design Expert and Statis 360. Now, some Statis 360 exclusives, we added Python scripting. So we've long had requests for, hey, I'd like to automate some process. I'd like to do more complicated simulations. I'd like to make it easier to import and export data from Design Expert to some other software package. It's really easy to do this now with Python scripting. We added a large variety of space filling designs. These were targeted more for people that are doing computer experimentation. And finally, we added Gaussian process models, which kind of goes hand in hand with space filling designs. So I'm not going to talk about the Statis 360 features in this case. However, we do have several webinars on our YouTube channel that go through the Python scripting feature and go through multiple examples. And then I recently just did a second iteration of a webinar that was just focused on space filling designs and Gaussian process models. So I encourage you to check those out if you're interested in learning more. So one thing I think that everybody should know is one of the features that we added that makes the software super easy to use now, and this is what I want to focus on, is the round columns feature. So a lot of times when you build optimal designs, the software will give you something like this. Like it'll say, factor A or mixture component A needs to take the level 0.500257. And that's only displaying 6 digits here. This actually goes out a lot further. Through the round columns function, okay, you can actually go ahead and tell the software to either how many significant digits or how many decimal places you'd like to round everything off. Now, if you have a very small design and it's a response surface design, it's pretty easy to do this by hand. But if you have a large mixture design, rounding mixtures is actually very complicated because if you round one component up, well, then you have to round something else down. So the software will simply do this for you. And I'll just open up a very quick example here of a mixture design. Here's a 3-component design with 2 responses. And let's say, for example, I want to round this off. Now, this is a pretty trivial example, but I can show you that you can round the mixture off to 2 decimal places, 3 decimal places, 1 decimal place, and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and round off to 1 decimal place. Maybe that's as much as I can measure. Those are my precision limits. I get a little warning, and then you see that this gets rounded off in an optimal way. Okay. I mean, this is one of our best received features in the last few years. Another one that I think is critical that people be aware of is the import data feature. Now, what used to happen is you had to have set up a design with dummy columns and paste in data, and it was kind of a huge pain to do that. However, now when you're opening up our software, and I'll go ahead and just show you here, you can actually go ahead and click the import data button here, and this will paste in from whatever whatever is on the clipboard. So it could be from Excel, it could be from wherever. So I'll go ahead and just show you. Let's say let's go to this file here. I'll go ahead and say, well, you know what? I want to copy this data, copy it with headings, and let's pretend that was, copied and pasted from another software, or it was copied and pasted from Excel. What I could do is I could do import data, paste from the clipboard, and now all of a sudden my data is in here. What I can do is I can right click and I can delete stuff. I can make this row be the names. I can make this row be the units. Block, I can set the column type there as a block. I don't really need the run column, so I'm going to delete it. And as you can see, the decimal places here are a little bit off, but I could set this to be a numeric factor. I could set this to be a numeric factor. I can basically set these to be whatever I want. I can set this one to be a response. So as long as I just designate my rows and columns here, I can go ahead and click finish, and then the data is basically loaded in. So from any type of spreadsheet, you can now paste in data, and it's really easy to do. You don't have to figure out the lows and highs. You don't have to mess around with this spreadsheet directly. You can do it all up front. Okay. Now I'm going to just, let's see here. What I'm going to go ahead and do is, let's see here. Let's go ahead, and so those were the kind of what I thought were kind of the two most user-friendly features that we had put in. We have a webinar on Poisson regression. We have an entire webinar on the modified design space wizard that's on our YouTube channel. And the multiple analyses here, this is going to be coming up a few times in today's presentation, so I'm not going to talk about it really right now. So now, this is the current version of Design Expert and Statis 360. So this was actually released late last year. So it was after I gave my latest and greatest talk last year. I gave a little preview of it last year, but this is actually what we ended up putting in here. We added a new custom graphs feature. So we've gotten lots of requests over the years for, hey, I'd like to make a 3D graph that's where the points are this size and they're shaded by this response and so on. We now have the ability to do that using our custom graphs view. We added an analysis summary as well. We've gotten requests over the years saying, hey, you know what, I have 8 responses, and in order to compare them, I have to kind of click 1 response versus 2. I have to compare 2 versus 3. There's no way to look at them in a single unified way. And now that we allow responses to be analyzed in multiple ways, an analysis summary is really nice because you get a big picture view of every factor, of every response, of every analysis, every model that you're working with. We added shaded intervals. Okay, so these went into both Design Expert and Statis 360. Okay, this went into all of our software. Now, in Statis 360 only, we added the ability to fit blocks as random effects. So every once in a while, you'll run into a situation where you have lots of blocks, and it doesn't really make sense to fit blocks as a fixed effect, but rather as a random effect. You're now able to do that in Statis 360. And finally, we added a slightly more advanced Excel import-export tool, only to Statis 360. Now, this tool will actually be available in all of our software shortly, but for now, we only put it in Statis 360. So I'll go through these features now. So custom graphs is the first one. So you now have flexibility to create much more sophisticated graphs than what we used to be able to do. So before, we didn't used to allow 3D scatter plots. We didn't allow you to change the size or the shape of the points that are on here. And this is really useful in exploratory data analysis. This is useful if you're looking to really drive home a specific point. A single graph can tell a pretty big story. So I'll just go ahead and point out where that is right here. So, and just as an FYI, I am using, rather than using multiple versions of all of our software to show this, I'm just using the latest version of Statis 360, which is the beta version of the release that's going to be coming out later this year. But this is available in Design Expert as well. It's custom graphs. You can see here, for example, this right now looks like what it used to look like. But now, for example, you can, if you like, you can put multiple factors here. And on the z-axis here, you can put a response if you want to make it 3D, something like that. Okay. Let's say, for example, you know the points are the same size, but what I want to do is I want the points to be bigger. Where, let's say, let's go to size by where my conversion response is bigger. I want my points to be bigger. So here you could kind of see a trend as you go in this direction. The points get bigger. Now this doesn't tell the full story because I have one more factor, but you can kind of see generally what's going on here. There's lots of stuff that you could do here, and this will only keep being expanded in the future. You could also do multiple line plots. You can do a wide variety of things here. Okay. The next one is, I think, what I think is one of them, or one really cool feature, and that's that multiple analyses can now be compared to one another in a single view. I think this is really useful because lots of times people have multiple responses. They'll have lots of factors, lots of responses, and there used to be no easy way to compare them to one another. But now we added an analysis summary node. So this node is, I'm going to go back to my design spreadsheet here. If you look in this pane here, there's an analysis summary here, this button right here. Now, of course, I didn't actually analyze any data here, so it's totally empty, but I'm going to go ahead and just open up some tutorial data so I can show you this. So this is just a 3-factor central composite design with 2 responses that was analyzed. And now if I go to the analysis summary, this tells me, okay, these two, this compares the models to one another. It compares the block effects, it compares both the coefficients as well as the p-values. Okay, you can compare the fit statistics to one another here. So if you want to compare the r-squareds here to one another, or the lack of fit p-values, and so on. Same thing if you want to compare like the model AICC, not that it's really directly comparable to different responses, but if you were analyzing a single response in multiple different ways, you can compare some of these statistics to one another, as well as get all of the equations right next to one another here. And this is very helpful if you have more than, say, 3 or 4 responses. Okay. One cool little feature that we're going to add at the end of this year is the ability, you can see how this table is kind of, it doesn't really fit on here. You'll be able to right click on a table and click the transpose button. And what we'll have now is the ability to basically rotate any table in Design Expert and Statis 360. So this is something that kind of is pretty annoying when a table goes off the end of the page, and sometimes it makes sense to look at it vertically rather than horizontally, and vice versa. Okay. Next one, this is a Statis 360 only feature, but I'm just going to point out how to do it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up the tutorial data here. Okay. This is, let's go ahead and open this up. So this is shear strength, which is actually in the software. You can take a look at it. What happens here is that they have a two-factor response surface design. They have one response, which is the shear strength, I think, of metal bonded rods. And what they did is they repeated this design over, I believe it was 8 or 9, or it was over several days here. You can look at the block column. And it doesn't really make much intuitive sense to treat blocks as fixed effects, because we can't really go back to July 11th when this was run. Okay, so these blocks are just kind of a random sample of all possible days. Of course, if you fit this with fixed effects, it's not going to be catastrophic. Okay, but it probably makes a little more sense to treat days here as random effects. So now in the analysis, you can see if you were to analyze this using, say, the previous version of our software, this is the analysis that you get here. You just get the ordinary response surface analysis here. But what I'm going to do is just show you how to analyze this using random blocks. So I'm going to create two analyses so that you can compare them to one another. So I'm going to click on this plus button here with analysis. I'm going to create a new analysis for shear strength. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to rename it to shear strength random blocks. So basically I'm analyzing the same response, but I'm using two different models. And what you do in this situation is, instead of analyzing blocks as fixed effects, you would choose random effects. Okay. You can go ahead and start your analysis, and then you actually get an analysis that resembles more of what our split plot interface looks like. So you could see here that instead of getting, I'm going to compare, instead of getting a bunch of block coefficients like you would in the fixed blocks case, what you end up getting is a single variance component for blocks. Okay, and you get a much cleaner coefficients table here. And you could see that about 21.68% of the total variance in the data could be attributed to blocks, or in this case, it was the day-to-day variability, rather than getting 11 different or 12 different block coefficients. So this is something that I think is unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time to go through every single detail right now, but this is how you would use it, and it's available in the current version of Statis 360. Okay. And as you can see, this was added in the previous version of our software, which is the ability to analyze a response in multiple different ways. Okay, and finally, one kind of nice feature is that you're able now to shade intervals. This makes it sometimes very easy to be able to, so if I look at like this interaction plot, it makes it very easy to see exactly where the bounds are of your confidence intervals. It's not always very obvious, and if you have 3 or 4 different lines on an interaction plot, it's not always very easy to see where they intersect, where their confidence intervals intersect, and so on. It's a lot easier to do this now with the shaded intervals. So this is available in all of our software, and that was put in the current version here. Okay. And finally, in Statis 360, we do have, as I mentioned, we do have a import Excel feature that was put in. This will be available in all of our software eventually, but if you go ahead and import data, you'll see that there's an import from Excel file now button here. And this will basically just ask you to open up the Excel file. It'll paste in the data here, and you basically treat it the same as if you would paste from clipboard. So it does save you a step here. Okay, so that pretty much gets us up to speed with what we have in our software through today. We do have a new release that's coming out in just about, I'd say in about 4 to 6 weeks. The beta version is already available, so if you'd like to try it out early, you're more than welcome to. But I'd just like to talk just a little bit about what we have coming up. Next year, when we're here again, I'll kind of do a more thorough recap of what we have coming, kind of we had put in the previous year. So here are the main features that were added in the version that we're going to be releasing in late 2023, and it's currently available. You can contact us if you'd like to use it early. I do just want to mention that if you are on an annual license, whether it's a subscription or a network license or a hosted network license, there's no additional charge to upgrade. So we do always encourage anyone, or if you're on a perpetual or on like a single user license, but you're paying the maintenance, you're eligible for upgrades without any additional cost. So we always encourage people whenever possible to be on the latest version of our software. For the vast majority of our users, there's no additional cost. There's no real extra cost to be using the latest version. So we always encourage you to do so. So in this version now, and now you'll notice that also our releases are a little bit smaller than they used to be. When we released every 4 years, we could pack in a ton of features, but then everybody had to wait 4 years to get all of them. We're basically releasing chunks that are about 25% of what they used to be, but now we're releasing them every year rather than having this massive release every 4 years. So we're trying to get features out basically as soon as they're ready to anybody that's on a subscription license. So this version has transposed tables in it, which I already displayed. We made some minor improvements to the analysis summary. And then there's some really cool stuff in Statis 360, which will have dedicated webinars just to these features here. So one is going to be the Gaussian process model enhancements. And another one is going to be reliability tools using Python scripting, or we call that DexPy. So as I showed before, you have the ability now, or you will have the ability to rotate any table, any output table in the software. Super convenient when you have a long table that goes off the edge, or if it's more convenient to copy and paste it into PowerPoint or Word in a specific format, and so on. So this, all you have to do is you have to right click on the little square here. Okay, that's at the top left corner of each table, and then select transpose, and it'll automatically transpose it for you. Okay. Our analysis summary now also contains some extra information. One thing that was really missing before was that we weren't reporting lack of fit and we weren't reporting curvature. That's now fixed. That'll be in the next version of our software. This is really important. People sometimes will fit 5, 6 models to the same response, and they want to see which one has the lowest or which one has the highest lack of fit p-value. Okay, this is really easy to do now. So I already showed this here, but I'll go ahead one more time and just show you how you would do that. You would go ahead and go to open up your data set, analyze it, and then go ahead and click on the analysis summary here. And everything is here in one location. Okay. This one I'm going to spend a minute talking about here. So Gaussian process model enhancements. As you know, originally in Statis 360, one of the big features that we put in was space filling designs. And these were geared towards people that were doing computer experiments. Now, when you're doing a computer experiment, kind of the defining feature of a computer experiment is the fact that you're not really in a lab experimenting. What you're doing is you're running a simulation. You're kind of setting up an experiment using code and then running a simulation and getting an output value. If you run that simulation multiple times, you get the exact same output value, so there's really no error in the data. So using something like a quadratic model or a cubic model would not be a great idea because it's going to fit error. Okay, so what we had put in were Gaussian process models in order to be able to fit this data. These were tailored. This is what they look like. You can see that the black line is the model. It goes through all the points, but then what it does is it interpolates between the points. And you can see that there's also confidence intervals here. The confidence intervals around the actual data points are 0. Well, they're length 0 because we know that that data point is 100% error-free. The only error that comes here in these green regions is basically interpolation uncertainty. Okay. A lot of people really liked this feature, but unfortunately they were using it for data that had errors. So like data that they had collected from a lab experiment. And in order to do that, you basically want to use a Gaussian process model that can handle error. And that's what we added to Statis 360. So this is one of my favorite models now because it's incredibly flexible. It can fit anything from simple quadratic curves all the way up through data that has lots of peaks and valleys and really would not be appropriately modeled with a linear model. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'll just go ahead and show you how you would do that. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and open up this little, whoops, I had moved it, so I need to open the design. I need to go here. And this is just a little toy example that I came up with just so it's very clear as to what's going on. You can see in this case, I only have one factor, and the data kind of looks like there's a little bump here, goes down, and then what happens is that it shoots up here kind of towards the end. This is not something that would be great, assuming that there wasn't any major issues with collecting the data, and assuming that this is roughly the trend we're looking at. This would not be very well modeled by a polynomial model unless you went up to a really high order, like a quartic or a fifth order model. So what you can do is you can do the following. I'm going to go ahead and clear this just to show you how to start this from the beginning here. I'm going to go ahead and analyze this. And here's how you can do it. You could do it using linear regression if you'd like. I mean, in fact, I'll analyze it 3 different ways. I'll use linear regression first, so I'll rename this to be linear regression. And then if you go ahead and click Start Analysis, you basically get, you get really high order models that are, you get a cubic model that's suggested here. And you basically get the normal RSM analysis, but you'll see that there's problems, like there's a major outlier here. There's a major outlier here. So if I look at the model graphs, this isn't fit horribly, but I do think that it could be a little bit better, and you're using a lot of terms to model this data here. So what I'll do is now I'll try to model it using add a second analysis here. I'll use, let's see here, I can use Poisson. I'm going to use Gaussian process 0 error. I'll go ahead and start the analysis. Now by default, we have to select the smoothing parameter, which is done using maximum likelihood. So what I can do is I can go ahead and calculate that, calculates it to be 0.217, and when I look at this graph, this is what it turns out to be. Okay, that was the graph that was on the slide that I had shown. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to rename this so that I know what I'm doing. I'm going to call this Gaussian process model with no error. And now what I want to do is I'm going to add a third analysis. So I'm going to say this is going to be Gaussian process model. I'm going to call it noisy with error. Or I'll call it with error here. Okay. And I'll go ahead and I'll go to noisy. That's the one we want to use. I'm going to go ahead and start the analysis. As always, you can calculate the smoothing parameter here in a couple different ways. You can manually input one, use cross-validation, or maximum likelihood. And if you look at this, this is exactly the graph that was in the slide. So this is a Gaussian process model that fits data that has uncertainty in it. Okay, this is just a very simple example here, mostly just so that I could easily show what's going on without having to get too far into the weeds. But these are basically the types of models that you're now able to fit. And let me go here. Okay, so that kind of takes care of what we're going to be. Let me just make sure I covered everything. Yeah, there's also these reliability tools, which basically if you're using Python scripting, what we'll have is we'll have some tools for like Weibull analysis, things like some lifetime analysis you can do. Now, this is only going to be through Statis 360, the Python scripting library, but it'll allow you to interface directly with Statis 360, Design Expert, and so on if you do it. Eventually, these tools might be hard-coded into our software, but what we plan to do is we plan to have I plan to give a webinar later this year that just goes through these tools that we're going to be putting in. And finally, we're already thinking about 2024, and this is what we kind of have on our wish list. We went back through the last 4 or 5 years of requests for statistical features, and here's kind of what we tallied up as the most common requests. Now, I would love to encourage everyone here to send in suggestions or requests if there's something that you have been waiting for a long time that's not in our software yet. Now is the time that we can still kind of put it on our list for consideration. But so far, what we're thinking about is we're thinking about alias optimal designs. We'd like to do upfront design evaluation for response surfaces and mixtures. So for those of you that maybe have used our evaluation feature, it turns out what you have to do is you have to kind of build a design and then go to the evaluation. And then if you don't like it, you have to rebuild the design. Like maybe your FDS is too low or you don't like the aliasing structure. This is really inconvenient. And what we want to do is we want to incorporate as much of the evaluation as possible directly into the design build process, not something that you do out after you build the design. This can save a lot of time and make things a lot easier. And in Statis 360, we plan to really expand our offering, kind of our mixed designs that use mixed models for analyses. So things like split plot designs, strip plot designs. And we have a few more on the list, but these were, when we tallied these up, these were the 2 most common ones that had been coming up over the years. So that's what we have so far. This is very fluid at this point. But the reason why I'm putting this here is because if there are any suggestions or requests or any other feedback that you have, we would love to hear it. And finally, before I go ahead and sign off, I do just want to talk about a new license option that we have. This is something that's actually, we've sold a lot more than we were expecting. This is what we call, it's a hosted license solution. So for those of you that are using a network license right now, like a 5-seat or 10-seat network license, you have to manage that license, or your IT department has to manage that license server, and then you install the software on each computer. This can be very tedious, especially for small groups that might not have a dedicated IT person, or if your IT department is incredibly busy or non-responsive. A hosted license works just like a network license, except that the license manager is handled by Statis. So we don't receive any user data, like your designs, your outputs, your analyses, those stay on your machine only. The only thing we do is manage how many seats are in use, how many seats are free, and so on. So this is a great option for small teams with limited IT resources. And if you have any questions, we encourage you to reach out to sales@statis.com. And with that, I'd like to think that I hit exactly 45 minutes here, my allotted time. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I really wish that we had more time to dig into each of these features. But at this point, I think breadth is more important than depth. And we will have dedicated either tutorials or articles or help system entries or YouTube videos, webinars on pretty much all of these features that I've talked. A lot of them are already out there, but some of the ones that we haven't released yet, I mean, we always try to release as much supporting material as possible, free supporting material as possible, so that you're able to use this and teach yourself. And of course, we are always available to point you in the right direction. So once again, I want to thank everybody for coming. And with that, I wish you a good morning or a good evening, wherever you are, and hopefully you found this useful. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Martin. We do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So Len asked, Does rounding affect the power of the design?
Good question. The answer is it probably does. I mean, it's not never going to be zero, but generally the change is going to be very, very small. I mean, going from 3 decimal places to 2 decimal places, that's generally going to be pretty minimal. And one thing that in our webinar that I gave, I encourage people always to do is if you're unsure, like if you're going, say, from 6 decimal places to 1 decimal place, you can always check the power kind of before you round and after you round, just to make sure that you don't lose it. But there hasn't been a case that I've seen really where there was a substantial loss of power because you trimmed off a decimal point or 2.
Thank you. Another question, would you be adding options to have more than one blocking factor?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That is on our 2024 list as kind of, it's almost like part of the strip plot design family. So the answer is at some point it will be there. But we are considering adding strip plots, which is a very similar mechanism to a double blocking factor.
Okay, well, as a reminder, if anybody has any additional questions, they can send them directly to martin@staties.com or into stathelp@staties.com. So with that, I would like to thank Martin for his time with us today. It was great to see these recent features and the new things that are coming up.